In this video, I'm going to show you how to create an interactive tab component in Figma. I'll break down the individual components that you need to make it. I'll show you how to create that in multiple styles, and then how you can set that up across all of your pages so you only have to update it in one place, and then all your tab instances will update automatically. So let's jump right into it. Here's a quick demo of what we're looking at, just a simple navigation, but one of the unique things about this, like I said, is that we're going to build it in a way where we can swap these styles. We can also update the content really quickly without having to do too much repetitive work. If we take a look at the end result here, this is pretty much what it looks like. We have an individual component for the tab items. So this is going to cover the hover state, active state, and then however many styles you want. In this case, I've got kind of a bold and then a minimal style there. Then we're going to create a tab group component, and that's going to allow us to have unique states for each of the active tabs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 8, or however many options you want. And then we're also going to do that in a minimalist style. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but we're going to build it in such a way that we basically build this top half, and then we can really quickly create multiple styles without having to re-prototype all those different interactions. So to get started, let's just go ahead and create a new text layer down here. We'll call this label. We'll hit Shift-A to wrap that in an auto layout frame. And for a lot of this, I'm not going to worry too much about how it's styled or make sure it looks too pretty, because I'm sure we're all going to style it differently. But from here, we can go ahead and turn this into a component. So just Command-Alt-K, and we'll rename this something like tab item. Now, you can also add an icon if you want. I generally gravitate toward the SF Pro icon pack, which is technically a font. And as long as your font is set to SF Pro, you can pretty much just paste your icons in there. Regardless if you're using a font or a set of vectors, I do recommend setting the width and height to a fixed frame. So we'll change this to fixed width and height and set that to 24, and just make sure everything's centered. Not every icon's the exact same size, so this just ensures it's not going to throw off our padding too much. Just going to add a little bit of spacing between our label there and set this to regular. Then we can go ahead and create our other states. So we'll click on the tab item, come up to the top right, drop this down and click Add Variant. Now I'm going to go ahead and add Auto Layout just to the component frame so that when I duplicate this out, everything's automatically spaced. Then I'll select all of my variants there and change this from fill to hug. Not always sure why it always defaults to fill. I wish it would just keep it to hug and then make the parent hug, but it's a weird Figma bug. And as long as you do that, if you wanted to change the orientation, it won't mess up the width of your components. If you set it to fill, everything's going to get really compressed and squished, so that just makes sure that doesn't happen. And then from here, we can start to create our other variants. So you'll see at the top we already have this property 1. Let's click into that and rename this to state. We can leave the first one to default, but we'll change the second to hover, third to active, focused, and disabled. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to show you the hover and active states because those are the most common interactions you build in, especially from a design system level. They're just there for reference. And then I'm just going to quickly add some default styling. So I'll throw a simple hover effect here. We'll change the active to have something bold like a blue. Focused, we'll add just a light color, something like this, and a stroke. I'm going to set that to outside. I'm also going to use the same primary and maybe set it to 2. And then for disabled, for now, I'm just going to set that to 35% opacity on the text, and it'll look not clickable. Now the next thing we want to do is link our label property. So what we can do is select any one of the labels here, hit Q on the keyboard to trigger multi-select, and as long as all of your variants have the same hierarchy and the same layer names, it'll go ahead and highlight the similar layers. We'll come to the top right where it says label and click this little hex icon, then select plus. And basically we're just going to create a text property, so you can call it whatever you want. And then under value, that's just going to show the default placeholder value. So you could set this to tab if you want. And when we hit create, you'll see that all updates. I'm going to do the same thing for my icon because this is a font technically, so it's going to be set up in the same way. I'm going to set this to set icon. But while I have it selected, I'm also going to come down to appearance, and I'm going to give a Boolean property to toggle it on and off. So I'll say show icon. And if we just drag an instance out, just holding Alt and drag, you'll see some of the properties we have now. So we have our active, hover, focused, and disabled states. And then we also have the option to override the value of our label as well as our icon, and we can toggle that off by just clicking that toggle. If you want the toggle to show at the top, you could come up to the tab item, and if you hover over the individual properties, you'll see this little bar here, and you can just simply drag it to the top. That way, if there's no icon on, that property will come underneath the toggle so it doesn't get in the way. From here, we just need to link up our components, so we're going to select our default state. I like to use Shift-E to toggle over to prototype mode, and you'll see the little prototype handle. We'll drag this over to the hover state and set this trigger to while hovering. Then we'll do the same thing for hover and link it to active, and this we're going to leave to on click. So if we just want to quickly preview what it looks like, we're going to drag this into a new frame. And we can jump over to prototype mode. We should have a simple hover effect, and when I click, it'll change to the active. And I realized we didn't actually turn off the active state. It's not that important for the sake of the way we're building this out in the context of a component group. But if you want to, you can come back to the active state and just drag an arrow all the way back to default. That's all you have to do. And if we jump back, you'll be able to toggle that on and off. Now, one bonus tip here is if you're using different font weights across your variants, for example, on the active state, you might want this to be set to something like bold. There is going to be a discrepancy in the width between each of your variants. So if we look at the width of this text layer, this is set to something like 29. But if we click into some of the others, it's also set to 29. So I will jump over to something like black, and you'll see that jumps to 30. So not every font weight, obviously, is going to have drastic changes. And you might not think that a 1 pixel difference is going to make that big of a gap between, because everything's still horizontally centered. But what you will notice is once you start putting these all in a row, and we're using auto layout for everything, that 1 pixel adds up, and a lot of users will be able to notice the difference. So when they hover over 1, it's going to shift everything off by 1 pixel. And of course, the thicker your font weight or whatever versions you're using, the bigger that's going to be. So there is a little hack to fix that. And the way I do that is I select my label here. Again, I'm going to hit Q to select all of them. I'll hit Command D, and we're going to rename this something like label emphasis, just to keep it clear. And then I'll shift click the other label as well, and then I'll hit Shift A. So all we did was create a copy, wrap those two in an auto layout frame, and we're going to change the orientation here to vertical. And then this is a really important step, but for the height, you want this to match the line height of your text layer. For me, that's going to be 24 pixels. And then you're going to want to set that to the top left, and then clip content. Then we'll click down and select the label emphasis and set that label to whatever that thicker font weight is. So I believe over here we set this to black. So you're going to want to go to your label emphasis and make sure that's set to black as well. What we're doing here is basically baking in the widest version of our font into all of the non-active states so that all the widths are the same as the active state. Yes, it is going to be half a pixel, 1 pixel off in terms of your horizontal alignment, but that is worth sacrificing for the optical alignment of when a user hovers over and then clicks on a state and not having everything shift. The last thing here would just be to set it to 0% opacity. And the benefit of linking everything to the same text property is that that's always going to be the same width. So whatever we type here, if I just change this, our label emphasis is getting all of that same content, and it's resizing, but with that wider font weight. So now if I just put a couple of these to show you in a little auto layout frame, I can jump back into prototype mode, and you won't see any shift in the elements if we hadn't done that. From here, we can go ahead and start creating our tab group. So I'm just going to Alt drag and create an instance, and then I'll create Shift A to wrap that in an auto layout, and then we'll just create however many versions we want. I typically like to do 8. Of course, you can do as many as you want. Just note that we are going to be prototyping all those different versions. So if you do need 16 or 20, you're going to have to do that amount of prototyping that many times. We'll make sure that all the items are set to hug contents again, and then we'll click our frame, and I'm going to be doing a horizontal tab group, but the same thing applies if it's vertical. We're going to set that to hug contents as well. And now we've just basically got a row of all our versions. We can go ahead and create a component again, and we'll name this tab group. Now, before we create our other versions, we do want to make sure each of these have a unique name. Right now, they all are just set to tab item. So we can select all of those, hit Command R, and this will pull up the bulk rename tool so we can name all of these at once and still give them a unique name. So to do that, you can type the $ and then the lowercase n. If you do a capital N, it's going to put a reverse order. So if you wanted to start at 8 and then count down to 1, you can. We, in this case, want to go 1 to 8. So we'll do that. And if you do multiple n's, it'll actually create leading zeros. Just keep it simple. We'll do lowercase n, hit rename, and then all of those items are updated. Then let's go ahead and create a variant for each of the selected tabs. So we have 8 items here. We're going to create 8 variants to show a unique active state for each of one of those. So select your tab group, come up to the top right, and then select Add Variant. We'll change this property 1 to active item. And then if you want to add auto layout to this component again, just to help space things out, you can. That way, when we duplicate out our other versions, they're automatically spaced out. Now, the same thing is going to happen here where we want to give each variant a specific name, but we can't just necessarily give it a unique number because now they have a property assigned to it, which is that active item. So if we select all our variants here, we hit Command R, we want to copy this first part, active item equals, or whatever label you gave it, paste that into the rename field, and then we'll type the $NN. This is basically just the way that Figma labels its properties, so you have to follow this structure, and you can just copy it from the left here so you don't have to guess. And if we hit rename, now it's going to make sure it fits inside of those drop-down values so we don't have to go through and rename it one by one. So if I drag out an instance, you'll see now we have an active item property, and then all of these are numbered to the active item. Obviously, we haven't set the unique style yet, so nothing's changing, but we have made that process of filling out the drop-down values a lot faster. Now, this part's pretty straightforward. You're just going to click into each tab and then set this to active across all the different versions. So 1 will have the first tab, 2, the second, and so on. This will also make it easier when we need to prototype in a minute because we're going to get a little lost when we select all of them if they all look the same. So what we want to do now is basically prototype every non-active tab to the corresponding variant that it needs. So for item 2 through 8 here, we want those to map to variant 2, variant 3, and so on. But we also want to make sure that if we go to variant 2, we can get back to variant 1 by clicking on the first tab. So a simple way to do this is by selecting your first tab, hitting Q, and then hitting Shift E. So now we've selected all of the first tab options across the variants, and we can now prototype that by just clicking and dragging to the first version. And then we just do that for all the other items. So we'll hit Q again on the second item, hit over to Shift E, and then drag this to the second component. Same for the third, and so on. And basically, you're just going to map to whatever the current styling is. That's why we want to make sure we set that up front so we don't get lost when we're selecting all these versions. Just makes it a little bit easier. And now you'll see if I click out, we have all of the cross navigation that we need. So we can pretty much now click any tab out of order, and then we can get to where we need to go while not while also not having active states across multiple tabs, because you only would realistically have one tab active at a time. If we do want to just test that, we can create a little frame. I'll drag this component in here. And we should be able to hover over and click any one of the tabs, click back, out of order, and we don't see any errors here, so we're good to go. So if you want to add your minimalist style, it's actually pretty simple now because a lot of the prototyping is done for us. So the way you would start with that is come back to the tab item. We'll come up to the properties here and select variant, and we'll set this to style. And you can leave it set to default for the value. I'm going to call this current style bold. And then I'm just going to hold command and drag this frame out a bit. And this is where you'd probably want to turn off auto layout for your component group so that we can pretty much add these variants without messing up the framing. And I just did that by selecting all the versions and then Alt-Shift drag down. So I can drag in place. And you'll see that the style property at the top right is highlighted. And here I'm going to type minimal. And then from here, you're just going to go ahead and change your styling. So for most of my minimal tabs, I'm going to go with something like a stroke or an underline. So we can get rid of the fill by just adding a new fill and then subtracting it across all the versions. I like to add a line for the underline rather than a stroke, just because it's a little easier to work with. But also, I've noticed that strokes can get a little buggy when it comes to switching over the end caps or changing to dash and stuff like that. We're going to set that to absolute positioning. We'll align it to the left and then bottom. And then if you hit Command while holding Shift, you can drag that in a straight line to the edge of the component. The one key thing you need to change here at the top right is changing left to left and right. That'll mean that the line will just scale to fill whatever the width of the tab item is. And then you can just copy and paste this across our other versions. Drag that down. And I don't actually need it on the default state, so I might hide it there. But then on the active state, we're going to change this to like a primary color. And same with the text. For the others, I might just throw in like a light gray. And for disable, we could set it to like a dashed line so it doesn't look as clickable. So obviously, you can make this look a lot prettier if you want to. I'm just going to roll with this. And now we just need to add that into our tab group. So the simple way to do this is come up to the tab group, click a new variant at the top right, and we'll set this to style as well. And we'll also fill this into bold or whatever you name the individual items. That way, all the existing variants automatically get renamed to bold so you don't have any conflicts. We're going to hit Enter and then hit Command D. This is going to create a copy. And if we hit Command Alt and then the right bracket, it'll push all of the variants to the bottom. We still have the style property selected, so we can rename this to minimal, and then we don't have any conflicts. We can hit enter one more time, still with everything selected, and this is going to highlight all the individual items in those new variants we created, and we can change the style from those, from bold to minimal as well. I'm also going to hit Shift Enter to go back up a level to the variants, and I'm going to remove the auto layout spacing since, again, I want to make this more compact. And pretty much just like that, our entire alternative style is built, and it still got all the prototype interactions, so we didn't have to do that again. Now that might be all you need, but if you want to see how you can create and link this across your actual pages, all we need to do is just create a new component wrapping this instance. So I'm going to drag this out here, and I'm going to set this back to hug, and we'll wrap the existing tab group in a new component and call this something like local nav. And then we're going to create our multiple pages. So we can delete this for now. I'll just create a few pages like so. And I only need 3 tabs, so I can go ahead and hide some of these others. And then I'll paste this navigation across all 3 pages. Maybe put it in the middle. And by wrapping it in a component, it means that when we prototype the pages together, we only have to do it once. So we'll click into the first tab and we'll map it to this frame, second to the second page, and the third to the last one there. So now on all the pages, they're already linked to each other. So if you have 20, 30 pages, you only have to do this once and you've already got all of those hooked up. It also means that if I want to change the labels or any of the content, I only have to change it in this one place and everything else is going to update. You do need to make sure that this local nav component is on the same page as all your other frames. You can't have this on a separate page because it needs to actually link to and draw a connection to those frames. So you can't have them across pages until Figma changes that. Just to show that something's changing, I'm going to add just a shape here. The last thing to do here is just to set the active state on each of the unique pages. That is something you have to do one by one, but it's really easy now with the new variants that we've set. So we can click into the second page, set the active item to 2, click into the third, and active item to 3. Then if we jump into prototype mode, we should have a pretty solid page that we can tab between. We can update really quickly, and if you want to swap out the styles at any point, it's really easy to do. So that's it for this video. I'll include a link to this exact file so you can mess around with it or make a copy on your own. If this was helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.